On my 18th birthday, my family handed me a box, small and wrapped in that same shiny silver paper Karen used every year like she was trying to pretend we were normal. And my heart fluttered because maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. I looked up smiling nervously, Karen standing across the table with her arms folded tight and her eyes unreadable, while my sister Chloe leaned back in her chair twirling her hair like she was bored at a dentist appointment. And my little brother Tyler was already snickering, probably because Chloe whispered something in his ear, and Uncle Mitch had that smug grin plastered on his face, the one he wore whenever someone was about to be humiliated, but it wasn't him. Grandpa sat quietly in the corner, his hands folded neatly in his lap, staring at the cake in the center of the table like he knew something I didn't. The box felt light, too light, and my hands trembled just a little as I pulled the ribbon loose, trying to keep my face neutral, even though my heart was thudding so loudly it echoed in my ears. I lifted the lid and that was it. No gift, no card, just a single folded note. And at first I thought it was a joke or some kind of scavenger hunt clue, my pulse jumping with a tiny flicker of hope, until I opened it and saw 5 words scribbled in black ink. Try being useful for once. Silence. Then Chloe burst out laughing, saying loudly even her gift is empty, just like her life. And everyone laughed. Jake chuckled along with her. Uncle Mitch slapped his knee like he'd just heard the best punchline of the year. And even Karen smirked like she approved. I couldn't move. My stomach twisted so hard I felt sick, the note dangling from my fingers, crumpling slowly as my grip tightened, my cheeks burning with something between rage and shame. Chloe's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, locked on mine, daring me to cry. But I wouldn't, not in front of her. My voice caught in my throat, but I swallowed it, feeling my hands shake as I set the box down before they noticed. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? Instead, I stood up, my legs numb but somehow steady, walking past the table, past the cake, past their smirks, until I reached the drawer by the counter and pulled out the envelope I had written the night before, just in case. When I turned around, the room fell silent. Even the laughter froze. Grandpa looked up. I walked back to the table, each step echoing on the hardwood floor like the house itself was holding its breath, and placed the letter right in front of Karen. No words, just a calm, deliberate motion. Her smirk vanished. Chloe's smile faltered. She blinked, confused, asking, "What's that?" But I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I sat down again, folded my hands in my lap, and stared straight ahead, my face calm while inside everything shook. Not with fear, but with something new. Power. Karen picked up the letter slowly, her fingers tight around the edges, but she didn't open it yet. Her jaw was clenched, and her eyes flicked between the envelope and my face, like she was waiting for me to explain. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating, the kind that makes every small movement feel enormous. Chloe rolled her eyes and said, "What is this?" Another one of her poems. Jake chuckled like it was finally safe to laugh again, and Uncle Mitch sighed sharply, muttering, "Drama queen," under his breath, breaking the brief spell as the room erupted back into casual cruelty, as if they hadn't just dropped a verbal grenade in my lap 5 minutes earlier. As if the note hadn't stung so badly I felt it burning under my skin. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was watching Karen. She still hadn't looked back at me since I set the letter down. Her fingers traced the envelope's edge, like she was deciding whether opening it was even worth her time. Her lips were tight in that expression she always wore when I disappointed her, which was apparently always. For the first time in years, something shifted inside me. Maybe it wasn't me who was broken. Maybe it was them. My eyes found Grandpa across the room. He wasn't laughing. He hadn't flinched. He just looked at me with quiet understanding and gave me the smallest nod, the kind that said, "You did the right thing." The candles on the cake flickered, forgotten. The humiliation sat heavy in my bones, whispering, "You don't belong here." But beneath it was something else, the first spark of freedom. And as Karen finally slid her nail under the flap of the envelope, a chill ran down my spine, not fear but anticipation, because they thought the joke was over, but it hadn't even started yet. The envelope opened with a soft tear, barely a sound, but to me it was thunder rolling through the room as Karen slid the letter out, her fingers suddenly cautious like she was holding something fragile or dangerous, maybe both. For the first time in her life she didn't know what to expect from me, and that alone made my breath hitch. I didn't look away. I refused to shrink like I'd been trained to do my whole life, taught to stay small when things got loud, to apologize even when I didn't know what I'd done wrong. But something in me shifted the night before as I wrote that letter, sentence after sentence pouring out of me like a dam breaking. I had stayed up until 2 a.m., fighting the voices in my head, telling me to stay quiet, to avoid conflict, to keep a peace that only existed when I disappeared. But I didn't stop. I wrote about Mark, about how his death cracked something in all of us, but how in me it cracked open a silence I didn't know how to fill, how I stopped feeling safe in my own home when he was gone. I wrote about how Karen changed, not only in her grief but in her presence, how she stopped seeing me, and when she did, it was only to point out what I hadn't done. I wrote about Chloe, about the insults disguised as jokes, the constant comparisons, the way she shined because she was loud and bright and easy to love, and how every jab from her felt like another stone in my pockets dragging me under. I wrote about Tyler, still young, but already learning cruelty like it was a language spoken at home, copying Chloe because he didn't know any better. I wrote about Uncle Mitch, turning every moment into a punchline at my expense, calling sensitivity weakness like it was a curse. I wrote about walking on eggshells in my own house, learning to be quiet enough to not bother anyone, and still never getting anything right. And then I wrote about who I was becoming without them, how I had started therapy 6 months ago in secret, how I applied to a creative writing program 2 towns over, how I'd been saving money from my bookstore job to move out by the end of summer. I wrote that I wasn't leaving out of spite, but out of survival, because I refused to spend the rest of my life begging people to see me. And at the end, I wrote one sentence, one that shook as I wrote it until I rewrote it 20 times. You will no longer have the power to define who I am. That was what Karen was reading now. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, and I watched the shift in her face. Not dramatic, not theatrical, but real, subtle, like something inside her wavered. Her brow tightened. Her lips pressed together. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She was trying hard, desperately, to remain neutral, but she couldn't. Lena's laughter faded first. She leaned in, trying to peek over Karen's shoulder, asking, "What even is that?" But her voice lacked its usual sting, softer, uncertain. No one answered her. Uncle Mitch scratched his chin, suddenly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like the floor had tilted beneath him. Jake slumped lower, glancing at me then away quickly, like he was afraid to meet my eyes, waiting for someone to make a joke to break the tension, but none came. The room was quiet, mine now. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in the silence. Watching them sit with my words, letting them choke on what they never let me say out loud, was more powerful than anything I could have screamed. They had tried to make my birthday a punchline, to reduce me to nothing, but instead I had handed them a mirror and made them look. Karen's eyes were still scanning the letter, but slower now. Like each sentence felt heavier than the last. Each truth something she didn't want to face but couldn't escape. Her lips twitched, the muscles around her mouth tightening as if holding back a reaction she didn't want anyone to see. Then, something I never expected happened. She folded the letter carefully, gently, not crumpling it or tossing it aside, but holding it with a kind of reverence that made the breath catch in my throat. She just sat there staring at it, the weight of the silence thickening around us. Lena shifted nervously, her bravado slipping as she repeated, "Seriously, what does it say?" But now her voice cracked, thin, unsure, because for once the world didn't orbit around her. Karen didn't reply. Instead, for the first time in years, she looked directly at me, not through me, not past me, at me, as if she finally saw someone who had been sitting in the same room with her all these years. When she spoke, her voice was soft, raspy, stripped of its armor. "You wrote this?" I nodded once, steady. She blinked, her hand trembling slightly as she held the folded letter. "Why didn't you ever say something before?" The question almost made me laugh, not cruelly, just in disbelief. I kept my answer simple. "I didn't think you'd listen." The words hit her like a physical blow. I saw it. Her eyes dropped back to the letter as though she might read it again just by looking at the outside, like the truth would be softer the second time. Lena looked between us, her confidence cracked, and snapped. "So what? You're just going to throw a guilt trip and act like you're the victim." But her voice didn't land the way she wanted, because for the first time ever, I felt completely calm when I turned to her and said, "Lena, you called me empty on my birthday." She froze, the words hitting her like icy water, because it was the first time I'd ever confronted her directly. I watched her chest rise too quickly, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Uncle Mitch jumped in fast. trying to break the tension with a dismissive wave and a huff of annoyance. All right, let's not turn this into a therapy session. She's just being dramatic. And that's when it happened. Grandpa Henry, who had barely spoken all night, lifted his head and said softly but firmly, "No." The room snapped still. Even Uncle Mitch shut his mouth. Grandpa rested his hands on his cane, his back straight despite the years weighing on him. "She's not being dramatic," he said, his voice steady. "She's the only one in this room who's had the courage to say what needed saying. Maybe instead of mocking her, we should have listened a long time ago." Shock washed over everyone's faces because Grandpa never took sides, never got involved in the household storms. He always stayed quiet, always kept peace. Hearing him defend me wasn't something I'd even dared to imagine, and the moment hit so hard I didn't know how to process it. I had prepared for rejection, for ridicule, for more laughter, but not this. Not someone standing with me. I felt something loosen in my chest, something tight and aching that had been there for years. I looked at Grandpa and he gave me that same small nod he had given me earlier, the one that said he saw me, really saw me, and had been waiting for this moment longer than I knew. Karen let out a slow exhale, staring down at the letter again, as if it suddenly weighed twice as much. "I didn't know you were hurting like this," she whispered. "I didn't list the birthdays they forgot, the nights I cried quietly so they wouldn't hear, the times I was talked over like furniture. I simply said, 'Now you do.'" The simplicity of it struck her harder than any accusation would have. I watched the words settle in her, watched her eyes lower in a way that was almost remorseful. Chloe looked between us, confused, maybe even angry that the conversation wasn't bending around her anymore. Tyler's face softened with something like guilt, though he didn't speak. I didn't wait for them to sort through their feelings. Instead, I stood up, not to storm out, not to slam a door, but simply to leave with every ounce of dignity they had tried to scrape from me. I lifted my jacket from the back of the chair, my hands steady now, and looked at them one last time. "I'm going to be okay," I said quietly, "with or without you." Then I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one tried to apologize or explain or undo what they had done. The silence followed me out of the house, thinner now, lighter somehow, like it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I stepped outside into the cold night air, sharp and crisp against my skin, and realized how warm and suffocating it had been inside that house. I hadn't noticed until I left. I shut the door behind me and stood still on the porch, breathing, deep, steady breaths that reminded me I had survived something, I had done something brave. I hadn't cried. I hadn't shaken. I had spoken the truth, and even though it terrified me, it also felt like freedom. The street was quiet, the sky dark but dotted with faint stars, and for the first time in years I didn't feel crushed by the weight of being unseen. I felt open. The next day passed in silence. No texts, no knocks on my door. Not even a passive-aggressive comment slipped under the guise of concern. I think my family didn't know how to respond to something they couldn't mock or belittle. I had handed them my pain, my truth, and my choice, and then walked away. That shift in power left them speechless. I felt lighter. Yes, relieved. Absolutely. But also undeniably sad, because even after everything, a part of me still wanted them to love me. I wanted Karen to hug me, to tell me she was sorry. I wanted Chloe to come into my room and say she didn't mean it. I wanted Tyler to ask if I was okay. I wanted someone, anyone, to say they were proud of me. But wanting doesn't make it real. Healing doesn't guarantee reconciliation. A few days later, Grandpa knocked gently on my bedroom door, the kind of knock that didn't demand anything, just asked permission to exist in the same moment. He didn't say much when I opened it, just handed me an envelope, gave me a soft smile, and walked away, his steps slow but steady. Inside, in his shaky but familiar handwriting, were words that hit deeper than anything I'd heard in years. "You're not wrong, Harper. I've seen it. And I wish I had spoken up sooner. You are not empty. You are powerful. Keep going." That letter meant everything. It didn't fix the years of silence or erase the ache inside my chest, but it reminded me that even if most of my family never understood me, someone did. And sometimes that one person is enough to keep moving forward. 2 weeks later, I moved out. I found a small room above the bookstore where I worked, tucked between a flower shop and an old photography studio. The rent wasn't cheap, but the space was mine. Mine in a way nothing in that house had ever been. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the window stuck in winter. but it felt like the first breath of air after being underwater too long. I filled the walls with sticky notes of story ideas, taped up half-finished poems, let empty coffee mugs collect on my desk, and played old songs on a little radio I'd found at a thrift shop. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like me. And that was enough. A week after moving in, I received an email from the creative writing program I'd applied to, the one I'd mentioned in the letter. I stared at the subject line, my heart racing, scared to open it because wanting something makes the fall so much longer if it slips through your fingers. But when I finally clicked it open, the words blinked back at me. "We are pleased to inform you." I got in. I actually got in. For a moment, I just sat there, my hand over my mouth, tears welling not from sadness but from the weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was building something for myself, not to impress anyone, not to prove my worth, but because it was what I wanted. Because I had stories to tell. Because I deserved to be heard. My 18th birthday, my real one, not the disaster at home, I celebrated again. Not with my family, not with empty boxes or forced smiles, but with 2 friends from the bookstore. We ordered takeout, sat on the floor of my tiny room, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. They surprised me with a chocolate cake, my favorite, something no one in my house had ever bothered to remember. And we laughed until it felt like the walls glowed warmer. No cruelty, no sharp comments. No pretending, just people who saw me, people who cared. Looking back, I don't hate my family. I really don't. I think they were hurting too, each in their own broken ways. But hurt isn't an excuse for cruelty, and silence isn't strength. They chose not to see me. They chose not to hear me. And for too long, I thought that meant I wasn't worth hearing. I spent years shrinking myself to fit into the empty spaces they left for me, mistaking invisibility for peace. But walking out that door proved something I had never understood. You can love people and still choose to leave them when staying means losing yourself. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the black sheep, the invisible one, the disappointment, I want you to know something. You are not an empty box. You are a story in progress. And you get to decide how it ends. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream or fight or argue. Sometimes it's standing up, speaking your truth, and walking away with your head held high. Healing doesn't always look like fixing what's broken. Sometimes it looks like building something new from the ground up, with your own hands, in your own voice. So if this story resonated with you, even a little, if you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or not enough for the people who should have loved you most, know this: you are not alone, and your story matters. Drop a comment below and tell me what part hit home the most, or just leave a "words feel too heavy right now." I read every single one. Share this video with someone who might need it, maybe a friend who feels unseen, or a sibling who needs to understand. Like the video if it made you feel something. It helps more than you know. And if you want more raw, real stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for sitting with me through this. Until next time, be loud even in your quiet, be honest even when your voice shakes, and never stop telling your story. Fade out with soft music and channel logo or social handle.